Have you ever wondered what the Bible says about our diet? It's a question that has intrigued many, and today, we're going to explore it together. Now, it's important to remember that the Bible isn't a diet book in the conventional sense. Rather, it provides us with principles and guidelines that can help us make wise decisions about how we treat our bodies and what we put into them. You see, from the Garden of Eden to the Last Supper, food plays a significant role in the biblical narrative. It's not just about sustenance, but about symbolism, fellowship, and divine provision. Throughout this video, we'll be looking at the various types of foods mentioned in the Bible. We'll explore what they signify and how they can be incorporated into a modern diet. So, if you're ready for a journey through history, health, and heavenly guidance, you're in the right place. Stay tuned as we delve into what foods the Bible encourages us to include in our diet. Starting with the basics, fruits and vegetables hold a significant place in the Bible. They're not just symbolic, but also deeply entrenched in the dietary practices of biblical times. These foods, in their purest forms, were the first to be consumed by humankind, right in the Garden of Eden. Yes, you heard it right. The very first diet was a plant-based one, as Adam and Eve feasted on fruits in their idyllic home. Now let's delve a bit deeper to understand the significance of specific fruits and vegetables in the biblical context. Figs, for instance, are mentioned quite often. They were considered a symbol of peace and plenty. The fig tree, with its bounty of fruits, was a sign of prosperity and well-being. Next on the list are grapes, an essential part of the biblical diet. Grapes were used to make wine, which was often consumed during religious ceremonies and celebrations. The vineyards were a common sight in biblical landscapes, and the fruit served as a symbol of abundance and fertility. And let's not forget olives, the source of olive oil, a precious commodity in biblical times. Olive trees were revered, and their fruit and oil were used in cooking, for light, and even in religious ceremonies. The olive branch is a universal symbol of peace, and it has its roots in biblical times. But it wasn't just these three. There were also pomegranates, known for their multitude of seeds symbolizing fruitfulness and righteousness. Dates, too, were a staple food, often eaten for their sweetness and high energy content. And then, of course, there were the vegetables. Lentils, beans, leeks, onions, and cucumbers, among others, were commonly consumed. These were often used in soups and stews, providing a hearty and nutritious meal. In essence, the Bible paints a picture of a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, consumed in their natural, unprocessed forms. These foods were not just sustenance, but also held deep symbolic meanings, tying the physical to the spiritual. So, fruits and vegetables were an integral part of the diet during biblical times. Moving on, grains and bread also play an important role in the Bible. Now, when we delve into the pages of the Bible, we find that grains, especially wheat and barley, were crucial to the daily life of the biblical people. They were more than just sustenance. They were a symbol of God's provision and blessings. For instance, in Psalms, the land of the righteous is described as being filled with plenty of grain and new wine. Let's talk about wheat first. Wheat was the most common grain and was often used to make bread, which was a staple food during biblical times. The Bible refers to wheat over 200 times, highlighting its importance. The parable of the wheat and the tares in the book of Matthew is a vivid example of this. Barley, on the other hand, was considered the grain of the poor. It was cheaper and more hardy than wheat, making it accessible to everyone. The Bible mentions barley in various contexts, like the miracle of the loaves and fish, where Jesus uses 5 barley loaves to feed 5,000 people. Now, bread making during biblical times was a process that began with sowing the seed and ended with baking the loaf. It was labor-intensive and time-consuming, but it was also a communal activity. Women usually did the grinding of the grain into flour, kneading the dough and baking the bread on a hot stone or in a clay oven. Bread was much more than just a source of nutrition. It was part of religious rituals and offerings. For example, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, a significant event in the Jewish calendar, involved eating bread made without yeast, symbolizing purity and the haste of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. Therefore, grains and bread were also a staple during biblical times. The importance of these dietary components is not just about their nutritional value, but also how they symbolize God's provision, the communal aspect of food preparation, and their role in religious observances. This understanding can enrich our appreciation of these humble, yet deeply significant food items in our own diets today. Now, what about meats and dairy? Let's explore. Meats and dairy were not left out of the biblical diet. In fact, they were quite important. However, it's essential to bear in mind that these foods were consumed in moderation and under specific guidelines. Let's begin with meats. According to the Bible, certain meats were permissible to eat while others were not. This is particularly evident in the kosher laws outlined in the Old Testament. For instance, Leviticus chapter 11 lists animals that may be consumed, including those that chew the cud and have divided hooves. This includes animals such as lamb and beef. On the other hand, pigs, despite having divided hooves, do not chew the cud and are therefore considered unclean. This is why pork is not consumed in a traditional biblical diet. Now let's move on to fish. The Bible mentions fish multiple times, most notably in the account of the feeding of the 5,000. Here, fish is depicted as a food that nourishes and sustains. However, just as with land animals, certain types of seafood were deemed unclean. Shellfish, for example, were not considered kosher. What about dairy? Dairy products were also a part of the biblical diet, though not as prominently as grains or fruits. Goat's milk is mentioned in the Bible, indicating that it was consumed. However, it's interesting to point out that the mixing of meat and dairy products was often avoided. This practice is still observed in many Jewish households today, following the commandment not to cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So while meats and dairy did have a place in the biblical diet, they were consumed under certain guidelines. This included the type of animal, how it was slaughtered, and even how it was cooked. As you can see, meats and dairy had their place, but there were guidelines to be followed. To summarize, the Bible provides a variety of dietary guidelines. It emphasizes the importance of fruits and vegetables, as they're a source of life-giving nutrients and vitamins. Remember, the first diet in Eden was plant-based. Then we have grains and bread, a staple in biblical times that continues to be a crucial part of our meals today. Whole grains in particular are highlighted, offering fiber and other essential nutrients. As for meats and dairy, the Bible doesn't shun them, but it does guide us towards certain types and encourages moderation. Lean meats and low-fat dairy are preferred, keeping our bodies nourished without overloading them. In essence, the Bible promotes a balanced and varied diet. It's not about rigid restrictions, but rather sensible choices and moderation. This biblical approach to eating aligns well with modern nutritional science, reinforcing the timeless wisdom found in these ancient texts. So, while the Bible may not provide a specific diet plan, it certainly offers wisdom on a balanced, nutritious diet.